Hi, BookTube. So, today I will be doing my review of The Scarlatti Inheritance by Robert Ludlum. This is actually a reread for me, so that my mind is fresh when I make the review. What's interesting about this book is this is actually Robert Ludlum's first novel. Excuse the swastika, I censored it out in the thumbnail. It's his first novel and it lacks what we call padding, which means there's this like additional material in a book to make it thicker that's not necessary to the plot overall. So this is Robert Ludlum without the padding. And it was published in 1971. So, for me anyway, who reads a lot of political thrillers, political and action and espionage and all of that, for me this is a rather interesting piece. So it was published in 1971. This is actually also a historical fiction. Now don't let the swastika fool you. This is not a neo-Nazi conspiracy. This is not a... Robert Ludlum writes a lot about conspiracies. This is not a World War II conspiracy. It's not even a 1930s Germany conspiracy. This conspiracy with the main villain predominantly takes place in the 1920s, 1926 to be precise. So it's Weimar Republic era, Roaring Twenties, Prohibition era, United States, Weimar Republic, Germany era. And in the 1920s, Hitler's Nazi party was actually a fringe group in Munich, regional group in Munich. That didn't have much power until, of course, the stock market crash of 1929 and when they came to power in 1933. So it's an interesting, it's a very interesting setting because, and this is, it's in between the stock market crash of 1929 and the beer hall putsch of 1923, if you're a history enthusiast like I am. So the setting and the conspiracy itself takes place in the 1920s, in an unusual time. No, well, I wouldn't say unusual, but an interesting time period for such a story to take place. So what's the book about? So the structure of the book is somewhat to a degree non-linear. The story itself takes place, the story begins in 1944 and ends in 1944. But then it jumps back 18 years to 1926. But then there's a few chapters in between, starting from the late 1880s to 1925. And then the bulk of the story, the bulk in the middle is 1926. So in the beginning, in 1944, we flash forward, not flash back, we flash forward, where they're looking back at a date in 1926. A certain member of the Nazi Party wants to give the Allies vital information to end the war sooner. But his demand is making public a file called the Scarlatti file, which could lead to scandal amongst some of the more wealthy Americans, shall we say. Nevertheless, he demands that this file be released. And the hero Matthew Canfield also travels to neutral Switzerland to meet up with this Nazi for negotiating the terms. That's all that's important. And then the story is resolved at the time when the two meet at the end of the book in 1944. So in 1926 is when the bulk of the story takes place, and then there is a brief few chapters after that that start from the 1880s to 1925. And that is, it shows the backstory of this wealthy cardboard paper company led by an by a half Italian family called the Scarlattis. The father is Italian, the patriarch is Italian, and the matriarch is not. I don't remember her last name, but her name, the matriarch is a woman by the name Elizabeth. So this wealthy couple, this wealthy power couple, who have a successful paper and cardboard company, acquire other acquisitions in their company. So they expand and become very, very, very exceptionally wealthy. And they have 3 children. And the third son, is a man by the name of Ulster Scarlett. She changed the name she anglicized the name from Scarlatti to Scarlett. Perhaps because of discrimination in the time period against Italians. I don't know. The father's last name was Scarlatti, but they anglicized it to Scarlett. So Ulster Scarlett is a man of, shall we say, antisocial, narcissistic, and sociopathic and psychopathic tendencies. I am not a mental expert, so I can't say. But he has some very antisocial tendencies. His mother notices this, but there's little she can do. There's little she can do to push her son in the right direction. Now then World War I breaks out, and surprise, surprise, Ulster comes back a war hero. He supposedly comes back a war hero. He fought bravely. He took out several Germans in November in 1918, and he was supposedly wounded, etc., etc. But then he says, I want to take part in the family business. I want to be a contributing member of society. He supposedly wants to do that after he returns from World War I. But secretly, he has formed an alliance with, shall we say, anti-Semitic forces in Germany. Not quite the Nazi party we know it in the later 1920s and 1930s. So he's formed an alliance with some conspiracy, with some anti-Semites in Germany. And what he does then is he gets married, has a wife and a son, Ulster. He learns the ins and outs of the family business. And then, on his honeymoon, he secures alliances with wealthy individuals, and he seems to be the middleman between some between some oligarchs and some companies and the fringe Nazi party in Munich. He says, this is the future. This is the vehicle for the future. And his plan essentially is he goes to Europe and sells off and gives a lot of his family inheritance, a lot of his personal wealth to the Nazis, and forms alliances with these oligarchs. The conspiracy is not exactly explained, but he says the Nazi party is the future. You just wait and see. And it's a little bit confusing exactly what he does, but he steals what is called securities, which is stocks. He steals them from a vault, which he's not supposed to touch until a later date, and sells them off illegally. So he did that during his honeymoon or just after his honeymoon in 1925. In 1926, upon learning of these things, meanwhile, 2 people, one Matthew Canfield, who is an agent to a very small a very small agency, I think a subgroup of the ATF or the early FBI, Bureau of Investigation, whose job it is to see how government funds are spent with private companies. And upon his discovery of some suspicious activity that Ulster Scarlett is doing, as well as Ulster's mother is Elizabeth, eventually they team up and try to stop Elizabeth tries to stop her evil son from handing off all of their family fortune to illegally, I might add, to the Nazi Party. And this was, so like I said, this happens in 1926. I don't know exactly what the conspiracy is. Is this like a beer hall putsch 2.0? And how high are the stakes anyway if the Nazi Party, if Hitler came to power in 1933 anyway? So I'm not sure how high the stakes are as you read it. So his company and his securities, the wealth that he takes control of, that he tries to take control of from his mother, is worth, in 1920s money, mind you, 1920s money, tens of millions of dollars, maybe even hundreds of millions. So in today's money, it's worth billions, maybe trillions. I don't know. So it would have given a fringe group in Munich a massive boost in finance. I guess the stakes are high in terms of principle and doing the right thing. Don't just hand out money to evil. But how high were the stakes anyway? Your guess is as good as mine. How high the stakes were that Ulster Scarlett be stopped. So Matthew Canfield and Elizabeth go over to Europe to try to track down Ulster and stop his evil plan of injecting the Nazis with tens of millions of US dollars and securing alliances with wealthy oligarchs from America and various countries in Europe. And you can see that the alliance is not very secure, so Ulster is like the glue that holds them together, that holds these wealthy people and this fringe revolutionary group together. This unholy alliance is rather shaky. So I would commend that. So I give credit to Robert Ludlum for having an interesting time period, for talking about an interesting time period. But I also question how high the stakes exactly were, knowing what happened later in 1933. And the story is resolved in 1944. I'm not going to tell you what happened all in 1926, and I'm not going to tell you how it's resolved much later nearing the end of World War II. The timeline is all over the map, so that deducts a point. It also deducts a point in the sense that some of the stock market mumbo jumbo flew right past me. I just couldn't comprehend it. Anyway, I've been repetitive. I give this book an 8 out of 10 because it was fast-paced, it remained interesting. I could mostly comprehend the economics and exact of what's happening. It's just some of the nuances flew past me. I couldn't comprehend it. The hero is a young man agent from a small law enforcement agency, and an old woman. An old woman is the hero of the story, trying to stop her evil son. So that's also an interesting twist. So for being interesting and for not having all the redundant padding, this book scores high. The story remained relatively exciting, and it took me back to a period of the 1920s. I love historical fiction, but it loses points for It loses points for having stock market mumbo jumbo I can't understand, and it loses points for having the timeline, the chronology of the story all over the map. Okay, I forgot to add, it's pretty much an open secret. It's not even a secret anymore. Pretty much everyone knows that in the 1930s, a lot of people in the Nazis had a lot of friends in the United States. That's, I guess, what this conspiracy of this book is based on, Hitler's American friends. So, but it's not really a conspiracy. It was pretty much an open thing, because there were some notorious anti-Semites, including that Ford guy. The other thing I want to say that I forgot to add is that the closest story that I can compare this to is, believe it or not, Captain America and the First Avenger, the movie Captain America, the First Avenger, in terms that it's a side story to the overall political developments of the time. So during World War II, Captain America battles the Red Skull, as opposed to Hitler directly.